The music was loud at the Royal Club, where rich people came to show off their money and success. Alexander Chen sat at his usual private table, drinking expensive wine and looking bored. At 35 years old, he had more money than he could spend, thanks to his successful tech company, but money couldn't buy him excitement anymore. His friend Tom Watson joined him at the table, carrying 2 glasses of golden-colored whiskey. Tom was also rich, but unlike Alexander, he still found ways to have fun, usually by making trouble. "Another boring night?" Tom asked, sliding one glass towards Alexander. "When was the last time you did something interesting?" Alexander checked his expensive watch and sighed. "Everything's the same these days. Fancy parties, beautiful women, business deals. Nothing feels new anymore." Tom's eyes lit up with an idea. He leaned forward and lowered his voice. "Want to make things exciting? Let's make a bet. A big one." This caught Alexander's attention. He and Tom often made bets, but they were usually about simple things like sports games or business predictions. "What kind of bet?" "A different kind of challenge," Tom said with a smile that showed he was up to no good. "You're always dating these perfect model-type women. I bet you couldn't marry someone completely different, like a fat woman, and stay married for a whole year." Alexander almost choked on his drink. "What? That's crazy." "Exactly why it would be interesting," Tom continued, enjoying Alexander's reaction. "You're always complaining about being bored. This would definitely not be boring." Alexander looked around the club at all the wealthy, perfectly dressed people. The idea seemed completely crazy, but something about it grabbed his attention. Maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe he really was that bored with his regular life. "And what would I get for doing this crazy thing?" he asked. Tom pulled out his phone and showed Alexander his bank account. $2 million. That's how sure I am you can't do it." Alexander laughed. "I don't need your money. I have plenty of my own." "Then it's not about the money," Tom said. "It's about proving you can do something really challenging. When's the last time you did anything that wasn't easy?" This made Alexander think. It was true. Everything in his life came easily to him. Money, women, success. He never had to try very hard for any of it. A challenge might be exactly what he needed. "Fine," Alexander said after a long pause. "But we need rules. How do we prove I'm really married and living with her?" Tom got excited and grabbed a napkin to write. "You'll need pictures and videos showing you're really living together. Regular updates about your life. And she has to be genuinely plus size. No cheating with someone who's just a little curvy." As they discussed more details, Alexander's assistant James came to the table. He had worked for Alexander for 5 years and knew all his secrets. He heard enough of the conversation to know this was a bad idea. "Sir, maybe you should think about this more carefully," James said quietly. But Alexander waved him away. The bet was making him feel excited for the first time in months. "Start looking for candidates, James. Check out local businesses, charity events, anywhere we might find someone suitable." James looked worried but nodded. He knew better than to argue when Alexander made up his mind. Tom raised his glass with a big smile. "To your upcoming marriage. May you find the biggest, most challenging wife possible." Alexander clinked glasses with Tom, already thinking about how to win this bet. He had no idea that his simple search for a plus-size wife would lead him to Sarah Mitchell, the woman who would change everything he thought he knew about love, beauty, and what really matters in life. The next morning, James placed a folder on Alexander's desk at his modern office high above the city. "I found several possibilities, sir, but one stands out. Sarah Mitchell. She owns the Sweet Dreams Bakery downtown. She's 32, single, and very talented. She's won several awards for her pastries." Alexander opened the folder and looked at Sarah's picture. She was definitely plus size, with a round face and curvy body, but she had bright eyes and a warm smile. Perfect for winning the bet, he thought. "Set up a way for me to meet her," he told James. "Make it look natural." And so began Alexander's plan to win the cruelest bet of his life, not knowing that he would end up losing his heart instead. Sarah Mitchell loved mornings at her bakery. The smell of fresh bread filled the air as she pulled another batch of croissants from the oven. Her hands moved quickly, spreading warm chocolate on the flaky pastries. This was her favorite time of day, before the customers arrived, when she could just enjoy baking. Her best friend, Jenny, worked at the counter, setting up for the day. "Sarah, you won't believe who's been coming here every morning this week," Jenny said, peeking through the display window. Who? Sarah asked, not looking up from her work. Alexander Chen, the tech millionaire. Jenny was excited. He's here again, getting his coffee and breakfast. Sarah had noticed the handsome man in expensive suits who started visiting her bakery. It was hard not to notice him. He stood out among her regular customers with his perfect hair and designer clothes. But she didn't pay much attention to rich people who sometimes wandered into her shop out of curiosity. The bell above the door rang, and Alexander walked in. Today, instead of just ordering and leaving, he walked up to the counter and smiled at Jenny. "Could I speak with the baker? These pastries are amazing." Jenny almost tripped running to get Sarah from the kitchen. "Sarah, he wants to talk to you." Sarah wiped her hands on her apron. She had flour on her face and her curly hair was messy from working. "Jenny, I'm busy with the morning baking." "Just go. I'll watch the ovens." Jenny pushed her friend toward the front. Sarah walked out to meet Alexander. Up close, he was even more handsome, but she noticed something calculating in his eyes that made her careful. "Miss Mitchell?" Alexander gave her his best charming smile. "I've been enjoying your pastries all week. They remind me of the ones I had in Paris." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Thank you, but I doubt my simple bakery compares to Paris." "Actually, yours are better," Alexander said smoothly. "Would you join me for coffee? I'd love to learn about your baking techniques." Sarah looked at her flour-covered apron. "I'm pretty busy, Mr. Chen. Morning is our rush time. Please call me Alexander." "What about dinner instead? I know a wonderful French restaurant." Sarah was surprised. Rich, handsome men like Alexander Chen didn't usually ask women like her to dinner. She had dealt with enough jokes and pranks in high school and college to be suspicious. "Why?" she asked directly. Alexander didn't expect such a simple, direct question. For a moment, his smooth manner slipped. "Why what? Why would you want to have dinner with me? You must meet lots of beautiful, sophisticated women." Alexander quickly recovered. "Beauty comes in many forms, Ms. Mitchell. Your talent and success with this bakery show you're a remarkable woman. I'd like to know you better." Jenny, who was pretending to clean nearby, almost dropped her cleaning cloth. Sarah studied Alexander's face, looking for signs that he was making fun of her. "The French restaurant isn't really my style," Sarah said finally. "But there's a nice family Italian place down the street. If you're serious about dinner, meet me there at 7 o'clock. Alexander didn't expect her to change his plans, but he smiled anyway. "Italian sounds perfect." After he left, Jenny rushed to Sarah. "Oh my God, you have a date with Alexander Chen." "It's not a date," Sarah said, returning to her kitchen. "He's probably just looking to invest in bakeries or something." But that evening, Sarah found herself spending extra time getting ready. She chose a pretty blue dress that made her feel confident, even though she knew she wasn't the type of woman someone like Alexander usually dated. Alexander arrived at the Italian restaurant early, checking his phone. James, his assistant, had texted him background details about Sarah, her favorite foods, her business history, everything that might help him win her trust. "Remember the bet?" Alexander whispered to himself as he saw Sarah walking toward the restaurant. "Just keep thinking about the bet." But when Sarah walked in, smiling warmly in her blue dress, something strange happened. For a moment, Alexander completely forgot about the bet. She looked beautiful in a real, human way that all his previous dates had never managed. "This is just part of the plan," he told himself firmly. But somehow, the plan didn't seem as simple as it had before. Over the next 3 months, Alexander found himself spending more and more time with Sarah. Their first dinner at the Italian restaurant had turned into many more dates, each one surprising him in different ways. One sunny Saturday morning, Sarah took him to her favorite farmer's market. Alexander felt out of place in his designer clothes among the busy market stalls, but Sarah moved through the crowd easily, greeting vendors by name. "Try this," she said, offering him a piece of fresh peach. Alexander usually didn't eat street food, but the way Sarah's eyes lit up made him want to try. The peach was the sweetest he'd ever tasted. "This is where I get fruits for my bakery," she explained, picking out more peaches. "The best food comes from people who love what they grow." Alexander watched her talk with an old farmer about his apple trees. She was so different from the women he usually dated. They would never be caught in a crowded market, tasting fruits and talking to farmers. But somehow, he was having more fun than at any fancy restaurant. Back at Sarah's small apartment, she taught him how to make peach cobbler. Alexander had never cooked anything in his life, he had chiefs for that. But here he was, rolling dough with flour-covered hands. "You're pressing too hard," Sarah laughed, placing her hands over his to show him the right way. Alexander felt something warm in his chest at her touch. This was not part of the plan. That evening, Tom called him. "How's the bet going?" "You've been quiet lately." Alexander felt a strange guilt as he answered. "Everything's fine. Going according to plan." "Really? Because I heard you were at a farmer's market today. That's not very Alexander Chen-like," Tom laughed. "Just playing the part," Alexander said quickly, but the words felt wrong in his mouth. The next week, Sarah invited him to teach a baking class for children at the community center. Alexander tried to say no, but Sarah had a way of convincing him to try new things. The kids were messy and loud, getting flour everywhere. But seeing Sarah help a small girl decorate her first cupcake made Alexander smile. She was so patient, so kind. When a little boy got icing all over Alexander's expensive shirt, he found himself laughing instead of getting angry. Later that night, in his big empty house, Alexander looked at his phone. He had dozens of pictures from the past months. Sarah at her bakery, both of them at the market, the kids' baking class. He had taken them as proof for the bet, but now they showed him something else, real happiness. His assistant James came in with some papers to sign. "Sir, Ms. Mitchell called. She's invited you to her friend Jenny's birthday party this weekend." Alexander remembered how nervous Sarah had been asking him. It would be the first time he met all her close friends. In his world, parties meant showing off wealth. But Sarah's friends were simple people. Teachers, nurses, small business owners. "Should I make an excuse for you?" James asked carefully. "No," Alexander said, surprising himself. "I want to go." That weekend, at Jenny's small house, Alexander found himself sitting on an old couch, eating homemade pizza and playing board games. Sarah's friends treated him like a normal person, not a rich CEO. "You're different with her," Jenny said quietly when they were alone in the kitchen. "At first, I thought you were just playing with Sarah. Rich guys sometimes do that. But you've changed." Alexander couldn't answer. The truth was, he was different with Sarah. The bet that had started all this felt like a distant nightmare now. That night, Sarah fell asleep on his shoulder while watching a movie. Looking at her peaceful face, Alexander felt panic rising in his chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to enjoy farmers' markets and baking classes. He wasn't supposed to care about her friends' opinions. Most of all, he wasn't supposed to feel this warm, wonderful feeling every time Sarah smiled at him. "What am I doing?" he whispered to himself, but he already knew the answer. He was falling in love. For real, and it terrified him. The wedding day arrived faster than Alexander expected. Instead of the huge, fancy ceremony his family wanted, Sarah had planned a small celebration in her favorite garden outside the city. White chairs sat in neat rows on the green grass, and simple flower arrangements decorated the aisle. Alexander stood in a small room, adjusting his tie for the 10th time. His hands were shaking slightly, something that had never happened to him before, not even during million-dollar business deals. "Your gift arrived for Sarah," James said, bringing in a small box. Inside was a beautiful diamond necklace that cost more than Sarah's bakery made in a year. "Take it back," Alexander said suddenly. "Sir?" "She wouldn't want it. Get her that antique rolling pin we saw at the vintage store last week. The one she said reminded her of her grandmother." James looked surprised but nodded. Alexander was right. Sarah would love the rolling pin more than any diamond. In another room, Sarah was getting ready with Jenny's help. She wore a simple white dress that made her look soft and beautiful. No designer label, no fancy beading, just pure Sarah. "Are you sure about this?" Jenny asked, fixing Sarah's hair. "It's only been 4 months since you met him." Sarah looked at herself in the mirror. "He's different from what I expected. When we first met, I thought he was just another rich guy who would get bored soon. But he's changed. Or maybe he was always different and just needed someone to see it." Outside, guests were arriving. Alexander's rich friends sat awkwardly next to Sarah's baker friends and regular customers from her shop. Tom arrived late, wearing an expensive suit and a smug smile that made Alexander's stomach turn. "Ready to finish this bet?" Tom whispered as he passed. Alexander couldn't answer. The word bet made him feel sick now. How could he have ever agreed to something so cruel? The music started playing, not the traditional wedding march, but Sarah's favorite song played by a small local band. Alexander turned to watch her walk down the aisle with her father. Sarah's face glowed with happiness. Her father, a retired teacher who had helped her start her bakery, had tears in his eyes. Looking at them, Alexander felt tears in his own eyes too, but not happy ones. The guilt was eating him alive. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. When it was time for their vows, Sarah spoke from her heart. "Alexander, you surprised me. You taught me that love doesn't care about what people expect. You saw me, really saw me, when others didn't. I promise to always see you too, the real you, and love you for exactly who you are." Her words hit Alexander like punches. He could barely speak his own vows, thinking about how he had not seen her at first, how this had all started as a cruel game. At the reception, Sarah's family welcomed Alexander with warm hugs. Her little nieces and nephews, who knew him from the baking classes, ran around his legs. Her mother thanked him with tears for making her daughter so happy. Tom watched all this with an amused smile. "The bet clock starts now," he said quietly when he got Alexander alone. "1 year of marriage. Hope you're ready." Alexander wanted to punch him, but Sarah appeared just then, happy and beautiful in her wedding dress. "Dance with me," she said, pulling Alexander to the dance floor. As they danced, Sarah rested her head on his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For being you, for choosing me. I know someone like you could have married anyone." Alexander held her tighter, his heart breaking. He hadn't chosen her. It had all been a cruel plan. But somehow, she had chosen him, the real him, the person he was becoming because of her. That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. Sarah lay peacefully beside him, but he sat on the balcony of their hotel room, watching the city lights. The bet that had seemed so amusing 4 months ago now felt like a heavy chain around his neck. "What have I done?" he whispered to the night sky, but the real question haunting him was, what was he going to do now? 6 months into their marriage, Alexander discovered something surprising about his wife. He was working late in his home office when he found some papers Sarah had left on the desk, detailed business plans and budgets for her bakery. Curious, he started reading. Sarah wasn't just running a small bakery anymore. She had been using her new connections as his wife to create something bigger, but not in the way he expected. The next morning, he followed her to work earlier than usual. Instead of going to the bakery, Sarah stopped at a rundown community center. Through the window, Alexander watched as she taught a group of teenagers how to bake. These weren't the fun children's classes he remembered. This was serious training. "They're from the youth shelter," Mrs. Rodriguez, the center's manager, explained when she noticed Alexander. "Sarah's teaching them professional baking skills. 3 of them already got jobs at local bakeries." Alexander felt something warm spread in his chest. His wife wasn't using his money to make her bakery bigger or fancier. Instead, she was quietly creating a program to help homeless youth learn a trade. Later that day, he visited Sarah at her bakery. The shop had changed a bit. New equipment, better ingredients. But it was still the same warm, friendly place. Sarah was training a shy teenage girl to work the counter. "That's Maya," Jenny whispered to him. "She's one of Sarah's students from the shelter. Your wife is changing lives, you know." Your wife. The words hit Alexander hard. This amazing woman was his wife, and he had married her for a bet. That evening, Tom called again. 6 months down, 6 to go. "Though I have to say, you're taking this bet very seriously. I heard you bought her new ovens for the bakery?" Alexander hung up without answering. He couldn't deal with Tom right now. At home, he found Sarah working on more plans in the kitchen. Papers were spread across the counter while she stirred something that smelled amazing. "What's all this?" he asked, picking up a document. Sarah looked slightly embarrassed. "I was going to tell you when it was more organized. I'm planning to expand the training program. There's an empty space next to the bakery. I thought we could turn it into a training center, maybe even a small cafe where the students could practice." Alexander looked at her detailed plans, the budget, the class schedules, even letters of support from local businesses willing to hire her graduates. "You did all this yourself?" Sarah stirred her pot nervously. Well, being married to you opened some doors. Banks take my calls now, but all the planning is mine. Is that okay? I know I should have asked before using your connections. Alexander pulled her into a tight hug, surprising her. It's more than okay, it's incredible. That night, Alexander lay awake thinking. Sarah had taken everything life gave her, including marriage to a rich man, and turned it into a way to help others. She could have used his money to live an easy life, but instead, she was working harder than ever. His phone buzzed with a message from Tom. Getting soft on her? Remember, it's just a bet. Alexander turned off his phone. That felt like poison now, eating away at him every time he saw Sarah do something wonderful. And she did wonderful things every day. The next morning, Sarah rushed into his office excited. 2 more students got jobs, real pastry chef positions. Her face glowed with pride. And guess what? One of them is Maya. Looking at his wife's happy face, Alexander made a decision. He had to end this bet somehow. Sarah deserved better than being someone's cruel game. He just didn't know how to fix things without losing her. But time was running out. Tom was getting impatient, and secrets had a way of coming out at the worst moments. The annual charity gala was the biggest event in the city. Sarah spent weeks preparing special desserts for it, wanting to show everyone what her training program students could do. Alexander watched proudly as the guests praised her beautiful pastries. Your wife is quite talented, people kept telling him. For the first time in his life, Alexander felt proud not of his own success, but of someone else's. Sarah looked beautiful that night in a dark blue dress. She was talking to potential donors about expanding her training program when Tom walked up to them, already drunk. Sarah, the amazing baker. Tom said too loudly, You know, I never thought Alexander would actually go through with it. Sarah looked confused. Go through with what? Alexander's heart stopped. He tried to pull Tom away, but Tom was too drunk to take the hint. The bet, of course. Tom laughed. Marrying a fat woman for a whole year. I bet him $2 million he couldn't do it. But look at you two, 7 months already. The room seemed to freeze. Sarah's face went pale. Around them, people stopped talking and stared. What bet? Sarah's voice was very quiet. Sarah, I can explain. Alexander started, but Tom kept talking. He had to prove he could marry and live with a plus-size woman for a year. Document everything. Tom pulled out his phone, showing emails where he and Alexander had set up the rules. See? Everything had to be recorded. The courtship, the wedding, the whole thing. Sarah looked at the phone, then at Alexander. Her hands were shaking. All those pictures you took, they weren't because you wanted memories. They were proof for the bet. Sarah, please. Alexander reached for her, but she stepped back. The farmer's market, the baking classes, meeting my family, was all for a bet. Tears started falling from her eyes. Our whole marriage is a bet? No, I mean, yes, it started that way, but things changed. I changed. Alexander tried to explain, but each word seemed to hurt Sarah more. Did you ever love me? She asked. Or was I just a way to win $2 million? Alexander couldn't find the right words. Everything he said sounded wrong. Around them, people were whispering and pointing. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, waiting for an answer that could make this better. But there was no answer that could erase what he had done. Finally, she took off her wedding ring and placed it on a table. I thought you were different, she whispered. I thought you saw me, the real me, but all you saw was a bet you could win. She turned and walked out of the ballroom. Jenny ran after her, shooting Alexander a look of pure hatred. Sarah, wait. Alexander tried to follow, but his feet wouldn't move. Everything was falling apart. The next morning, the bakery was closed. Sarah's apartment was empty. All of her things were gone as if she had never existed. She's staying with her sister, Jenny told him when he begged for information. Don't try to find her. You've hurt her enough. Alexander went home to his big, empty house. On his phone, he found pictures from their months together. Sarah laughing at the farmer's market, teaching kids to bake, sleeping peacefully on his shoulder. He had taken these pictures as proof for the bet, but they had become precious memories without him realizing it. Now those memories felt like knives in his heart. He had taken something pure and beautiful and ruined it with his stupid pride and cruelty. His phone buzzed with a message from Tom. "Guess you lost the bet. At least you don't have to pretend anymore." Alexander threw his phone against the wall, shattering it. He didn't care about the bet anymore. He didn't care about the money. He had lost something much more valuable, the love of a woman who had seen the best in him, even when he didn't deserve it. Sitting alone in his dark house, Alexander finally understood what real emptiness felt like. 3 months after Sarah left, Alexander's life had changed completely. His expensive cars sat unused in the garage. His designer suits hung untouched in the closet. He spent most of his time either at his office or at the community center where Sarah used to teach. "You want to do what?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked when Alexander first came to her with his idea. "I want to continue Sarah's program," he said quietly. "The kids shouldn't lose their chance just because I ruined everything." So 3 times a week, Alexander hired professional bakers to teach at the center. He sat in the back of the class, watching young people learn the skills Sarah had wanted to teach them. He didn't do it for show or to win Sarah back. He did it because it was right. One day, Maya, the shy girl from Sarah's bakery, came to the class. She looked at Alexander with angry eyes. "Why are you here?" she demanded. "Haven't you hurt Sarah enough?" Alexander looked at the young girl who Sarah had helped so much. "I'm not here for Sarah. I'm here because she showed me what really matters. These classes were her dream, and they should continue even if she hates me forever." Maya studied his face for a long time. "She doesn't hate you," she said finally. "That's what makes it worse. She still cries about you." The words hit Alexander hard. That night, he went home and looked at his life with new eyes. His house was full of expensive things that meant nothing. Sarah had lived simply but had helped so many people. The next day, he started making big changes. He sold his sports cars and donated the money to youth shelters. He turned his garden into a community vegetable garden where families could grow food. He volunteered at soup kitchens, remembering how Sarah always said food could bring people together. James, his assistant, watched all this with surprise. "Sir, what are you doing?" "Learning to be the person Sarah thought I could be," Alexander answered, carrying boxes of his designer clothes to donate. He even faced his rich friends, including Tom. At a business dinner, Tom made another joke about the bet. "Enough." Alexander stood up angrily. "What we did was cruel and stupid. I lost the best person I've ever known because of that bet. I don't want your money, and I don't want to be the kind of person who thinks hurting others is funny." He walked out of the expensive restaurant and went to the small Italian place where he and Sarah had their first date. Sitting at their old table, he ordered her favorite pasta and remembered everything. Weeks passed. Alexander kept working on himself, not for Sarah, but because he finally understood what she had been teaching him all along. Real value wasn't in money or appearance. It was in how you treated others. The community center's baking program grew bigger. More students found jobs. Alexander made sure each one had the tools and support they needed, just like Sarah would have wanted. One rainy evening, while Alexander was helping clean up after class, Maya came to him again. "I saw Sarah yesterday," she said. "She's doing okay. Her sister's bakery is doing well." Alexander nodded, trying to hide how much it hurt to hear about Sarah. "I'm glad she's okay." Maya watched him wipe down the tables. "You've changed," she said suddenly. "For real, I mean, not like before when you were pretending." "I'm trying," Alexander said honestly. "Sarah showed me a better way to live. I just wish I had realized it sooner." That night, Alexander sat in his simplified home, looking at his last picture of Sarah. He had taken it the morning of the charity gala. She was laughing while frosting cupcakes, flower on her cheek, completely beautiful in her happiness. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the picture. "I'm so sorry I didn't deserve your love. But thank you for showing me how to be better, even if I can never tell you." He didn't know that soon, life would give him one more chance to prove his change was real. 6 months after Sarah left, her old bakery reopened. Alexander found out when Maya rushed into the community center one morning, excited and breathless. "She's back," Maya announced. "Sarah's back at the bakery." Alexander's heart stopped for a moment. He hadn't known she was returning. Part of him wanted to run to the bakery immediately, but he knew he had no right. For a week, he stayed away, fighting the urge to see her, but one rainy morning, he found himself standing outside the bakery, watching through the window. Sarah was there, teaching a new group of students. She looked beautiful, confident, and strong. Taking a deep breath, Alexander walked in. The little bell above the door rang just like it used to. Sarah looked up, and their eyes met. The bakery went quiet. Her new students whispered among themselves, recognizing him from the news stories about their failed marriage. "Hello, Sarah," Alexander said softly. Sarah's hands were covered in flour, just like the first time they met, but now her eyes held pain when she looked at him. "Alexander, what are you doing here?" "I came to apologize," he said. "Not to ask for forgiveness or try to win you back. Just to tell you how sorry I am and to let you know what your love taught me." Sarah wiped her hands on her apron. "Let's talk outside," she said, leading him to the small garden behind the bakery. In the garden, Alexander spoke from his heart. "I was empty inside when I made that stupid bet. I thought life was just about money and appearances. But you showed me what real beauty is. It's in kindness, in helping others, in making the world better." He told her about continuing her program, about selling his cars and changing his life. "I didn't do it to impress you. I did it because you showed me a better way to live. Even though I lost you, your love made me a better person." Sarah listened quietly, her eyes studying his face. Finally, she spoke. "I heard about the changes you made. Maya tells me about the classes. Jenny said you even stood up to your rich friends." "I had to," Alexander said. "I couldn't be that shallow person anymore." Sarah picked a flower from the garden, turning it in her hands. "You know what hurt the most? Not the bet itself, but thinking that everything, every smile, every kind word, every moment we shared, was fake." "It started fake," Alexander admitted. "But somewhere between the farmer's market and teaching kids to bake, it became real. I fell in love with your kindness, your strength, your beautiful heart. I just realized it too late." A tear rolled down Sarah's cheek. "I need time, Alexander. What you did hurt me deeply." "I understand," he said, turning to leave. "I just wanted you to know that you changed my life. I'll always be grateful for that." But Sarah caught his hand. "I didn't say I wanted you to go away forever," she said softly. "I said I need time. Maybe we could start small. Come to the bakery sometimes, see the students, show me that this change is real." Alexander felt hope for the first time in months. "I'd like that." The next week, he brought vegetables from his community garden for Sarah's students to learn about fresh ingredients. The week after that, he helped fix the bakery's old oven. Slowly, day by day, they built something new, not based on bets or appearances, but on real understanding and respect. One morning, months later, Sarah was teaching him to make her special cinnamon rolls. There was flour on his expensive shirt, and he didn't care at all. "You really have changed," she said, watching him carefully roll the dough. "Because of you," he replied. "You saw the good in me when I couldn't see it myself." Sarah smiled, a real, warm smile that reached her eyes. "Maybe we both changed. I'm stronger now. I know what I'm worth." As they worked together in the warm bakery, surrounded by the smell of fresh bread and the sound of students learning, both Sarah and Alexander knew that sometimes love needs a second chance to get it right. And this time, there were no bets, no games, no pretending. Just two people who had learned to see the real beauty in each other.